welcome back to my channel. And for those who are just coming by for the first time, welcome. Please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you're alerted when I'm dropping new content. You can also find me on Instagram at Dr. Jenny from the Block, so feel free to follow me on that platform as well, where I drop other mental health related content. So before I jump into today's video, I want to first dedicate this to Ahmaud Arbery, who was a 25-year-old black man that was murdered in Georgia on February 23rd, 2020 by two vigilante white men that decided to take his life, and whose story is just now going viral this past week, even though his death was several months ago. It's really hard for me to make this video. I've been dragging my feet about it because it's tiring. Racism is tiring. Black death is tiring. Talking about it is tiring. And so I want to just honor and name probably the collective feelings of grief, anger, sadness, etc. that many of us Black Americans are experiencing right now. And thank you for those who are not Black that are standing in solidarity with us during this time. So, one of my subscribers in my last video had asked me to talk about the relationship between racism and mental health. And given everything that's happened, I think this is a perfect time to talk a little bit about the link and correlation between the two. So first and foremost, I want to say that yes, there is a link between negative mental health outcomes and racism. That's just facts. There has been plenty of research conducted by different fields and disciplines, and there is a consensus that experiences of racial trauma do impact us emotionally, physically, psychologically. So, I want to talk first about the systemic / institutional racism, and that is racism that is enacted through political and social means. If we look at American society, there are plenty of ways in which racist policies, racist practices pop up. One example is the prison industrial complex. If you all have seen Ava DuVernay's documentary, The 13th, that was on Netflix, you would see how it talked about, like, following slavery, Jim Crow, etc., that the prison population exploded. And those who ended up making up the majority of that population happened to be Black and brown bodies. It talks about the privatization of prisons and how labor is used from Black and brown bodies. And so, slavery became illegal, but then there was another loophole within our institution, our criminal justice institution, in order to essentially continue that practice. If you look at concepts such as redlining, which is used to keep African Americans and other marginalized people in certain geographical locations and cities, and usually those areas get less resources, not enough funding for schools and the education system, etc. If you look at the school to prison pipeline, these are just several examples of how institutional racism plays out. Even in healthcare, Black women are more likely to die during childbirth than women of other races. And that's not because Black women don't know how to have babies. It's because the healthcare system often denies our experiences of pain, of our complaints, and typically just disregard our concerns, which then leads to death, which you could see. Serena Williams had actually posted something about this a while ago. So institutional racism is real. Institutional racism is enacted in order to create inequities between racial groups. And how ours works in our society is that it is used to position whites and those who are more adjacent to whiteness in positions of power, positions where they can thrive, and people of color in positions where we are suffering, where we have less access to resources. Systemic racism is meant to make you feel helpless. It is meant to make you feel hopeless. It is structured to make you miserable. And it's used very intentionally to destroy the psyche. When you feel like the systems that govern your everyday life and being are working against you, you are going to feel apathy. You are going to feel irritation, sadness, depression, anxiety. That is what systemic racism is built to do. And as we see in our country time and time again, it works. Every time we have a murder of an unarmed Black person and then they get arrested, the perpetrator, and then rarely do they get convictions. That's systemic racism working to take away our hope, working to make us feel helpless. So, there are other ways that racism impact us, and one of those ways is exposure to violence. So one thing that has happened, as the technology age has boomed, is that we're able to see the violence against Black bodies. We are able to see Mike Brown laying in the street. We're able to see shootings of unarmed Black men and people of color on World Star, on the YouTube. These things are highly accessible. We are living in neighborhoods where violence might be plaguing our everyday existence. So repeated exposure to violence does negatively impact our psyche. We become hypervigilant, which means we're just always looking for the next threat. We become anxious or stressed. We experience more headaches, stomach aches. Not all of the negative symptoms of racism are felt just psychologically. They're felt in our bodies, and that's because our minds are trying to cope and adapt and understand what's happening around us. Also, and I'll save that part because I'm going to talk a little bit about how we recognize when we're not coping well. Another way that we are impacted negatively by racial trauma is through vicarious trauma. So that's for those of us who may not have physically been present on the scene, but for those of us who have watched those images, for those of us who are talking to people who have experienced the trauma firsthand, who are sharing those details, we start to take, kind of an emotional, not burden, but we start to carry more connection to what has happened. We start to really resonate with what they're sharing, which means we then also open ourselves up to feeling some of that secondary trauma, which, like I said, can negatively impact our psyche. Even racial battle fatigue, and that was a term coined by William Smith, a critical race theorist, which just talks about those everyday experiences where we could be microaggressed, or people are making subtle remarks, or we're having difficulty discerning what was racist and what wasn't, which helps with crazy making us feel that we might be delusional, and then we perceive everything as a threat, and that becomes tiresome. That happened to me where someone made an inappropriate racial remark, and because it wasn't necessarily directed towards me, but it was like them quoting a movie, I then had to think about, like, my body became activated, and I had to think about how I was going to respond. How do I navigate this? And that takes a lot of emotional energy, and some of us have to deal with that on a daily basis where we work, where we live, etc. And that over time will make you anxious and feeling hypervigilant. You might feel more stomach pains when going into those settings. So racial battle fatigue is another way in which racism starts to tear at us. I've already talked about how it shows up. Like I said, there are the physical symptoms, and one way to tell if you're being really negatively impacted by racial trauma is how and how you're coping. If you're noticing that you're feeling hypervigilant, if you notice that you're smoking or drinking more, or you're engaging in more destructive behaviors that put yourself and other people in harm's way, that can be a sign. If you're starting to feel really apathetic, like you don't really care what happens, you start to feel really powerless and helpless and hopeless, those are symptoms of racial fatigue. So these are things to look out for. But there are ways that we can cope. One way, I think the beginning, or the first step, is just acknowledging and validating yourself and saying, yes, racism is connected to how I feel right now. Racism is impacting my well-being. It's okay for you to acknowledge that because it is real. You are not crazy. How you feel is valid. Another way is creating a community of care. So that means reaching out to people you're close to, family, friends, significant others, who you can talk to about how these racist events are triggering you. It is really hard to be Black in America. It is really hard to continuously see our people be cut down and then justice not being served. Talk to people. Another way that we can start to get out of that helpless and hopeless place is advocacy. So get out there and, run with Maud. My daughter and I, we went out yesterday and, we walked in honor of his birthday. And that made me feel connected to the cause and realigned with my purpose as a person who will fight for social justice in all contexts and domains that I occupy. Doing things that calm yourself. Do some meditation. If meditating is not your thing, write, use journaling. If you rap, drop a mixtape. Talk about your pain. It's really important that you find an outlet that works for you. If you're into artistic expression, paint, create, do whatever you need to do to feed your soul. Also, it's important for us to recognize those internalized oppressive messages that we might carry, where we might believe that, we are not worthy of living a good life, or that nothing will ever change for us. That's not true. Our ancestors have shown us time and time again our resiliency. So really reconnecting with who you are, reconnecting with your ancestry, and reminding yourself that you are worthy, that you belong to be here, and you deserve to have a good life. So these are, some things that you can do. And if you're just feeling really overwhelmed, seek out professional help. There is no shame in contacting people for help. If you just need another place to talk it out, there are people out there who can support you. There are clinicians out there that want to help you and be there for you. So those are kind of some quick tips and ways to address, racial trauma. And this list is not exhaustive. There's plenty of other things that you can do. And in the future, I'll make a whole video that's dedicated to coping techniques and how to care for ourselves. But I just wanted to acknowledge that Black death is killing us. That Black death is really, is really part of our everyday life. And that within itself is traumatic. But I am wishing you all, peace and love and just hope and joy. And please take care of yourselves. Please keep a lookout for future content that I will be dropping. You all just stay blessed and beautiful, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Bye.